Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced from alexmercedcoder.com, and I'm creating a new Intro to Express series. I always just like to kind of update these intros every once in a while so that way they can be better. Okay, so first let's just get acquainted with what you need to learn about Express. You need to know JavaScript. Okay, so if your fundamentals in JavaScript aren't there at all, go watch my JavaScript videos first and get comfortable with JavaScript. You need Node.js, okay? So that means that when you go to your terminal, and you need to understand terminal so that way you know when I say run a terminal command, what does that mean? Watch my video on Bash, okay, and Bash scripts and terminal commands. Okay, that'll clear that up. Okay, but basically you should be able to type in node-v, which stands for node version, and get back a version. I'm working 14.9, but if you have like if you have any version within the last 2 years, you should be good. So I mean, like anything 10 or above, but I think even earlier, I think anything above 4 would work. Then there's npm-v, which is your npm version. I got 6.114, but the idea is if you don't get a version number when you run those two commands, you do not have these two things, and you need to get those two things. Where would you download them? You would go to nodejs.org. Okay, at nodejs.org you can download these things. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. I'm going to create a new folder. I have this folder called React that I use for React projects, but I'm going to do this here. I'm going to create a new folder, so I'm going to make directory Express, or we'll call it Intro to Express. And I'm going to cd into that folder. So cd intro to express. And then in here, what I want to do is I'm going to touch a server.js file. So it's just standard convention that the file that you're going to run that starts your server is going to be called server.js, because that's what Express is for. Express.js, it's all a framework, what's referred to as a backend framework. And the purpose of a backend framework is to help you create a web server. That's it. Okay. Now that web server can do lots of things. It can serve templates. It can render templates. It can deliver APIs. It can provide microservices. There's a whole bunch of things that that server can do. But the backend framework, the core of its functionality is being able to create a server. So I will touch this server.js file. That's going to be the sort of the heart of the project. And I want to install all sorts of stuff. So in order to be able to use Node libraries, I need to have a package.json. So I'm going to type in npm init. I'm going to use -y. -y just is like an automatic yes to all the questions that it asks you. So that way it just generates the package.json. Okay, if you hear my bird in the background, it just flew right above my head. So it's there. Okay, so here we go. So you see it created this package.json file. I can find that if I go inside the Intro to Express folder. See, it has a package.json and a server.js. If you're not familiar with what package.json does, it's the heart of a Node project. It tells Node everything about your project. Most of this stuff isn't particularly important, such as the name of the project, your version number. You can put a description. Really, the description, a lot of these things only matter if you publish your code to the npm registry, which is really only if you're creating a library. But things that do matter are going to be things like scripts. Here you can create commands preset for your project. Okay, so one thing I'm going to want to do here is I always like to create two scripts. A start script. Okay, that's just generally your normal, like, okay, what's your main command to run your thing? So I'm going to run node on the server.js. That should be my main command. So if I deploy this, they should run that command to get my server going. Okay, and then I'm going to start a dev script. Dev. And here we're going to use something called nodemon server.js. Okay, you don't really know what these things are yet. Sorry for the sirens in the background. I live in Brooklyn. Lots of sounds all the time. And if you've been listening to my videos, you've probably noticed the sirens in the background before. Okay. So node server.js, nodemon server.js. So don't worry about those right now, but it's nice to have those set up because we will be using them later. Now, I need a couple of different libraries. Okay, so to install a Node library, you would type in npm node package manager, I for install, and then the name of the library. So we want to install Express because we're going to use Express. That's going to be the point of this video series. So this installs Express. And when you install your first library, see this Node modules folder gets created. Okay. Now in the future, you're going to want to push your code up to GitHub. You do not want to push this folder to GitHub. So while we're here, let's create what's called a .gitignore file. This file tells Git, and if you don't know what Git is, watch my videos on Git and GitHub. Okay. And actually, if you go to intro.alexmercedcoder.com, you can find all those sort of intro foundational videos on Git, on GitHub, on VS Code, on Terminal, on Bash, to give you those foundations on a lot of this tooling. But .gitignore, we put things that we don't want to push up to our Git, primarily Node modules. Okay, so we'll add that to our .gitignore. Cool. Now another library we want is Nodamon. So I'm going to do npm I Nodamon. You may already have it installed globally if you use it, if you've used it before, but I like to install it locally so that way I know that I have it. So now it's installed. Cool. And so that's allows this command to work. Okay. So we've done that. So we've installed some things, and now look, if we take a look at our package.json, those libraries we've installed now show up here. Okay, so that's how you know they've successfully been installed. And the beauty of that is, if I were to delete this node modules folder, which I'll do right now, if I just delete it, I don't have to go npm install express again. I can just type in npm install. It'll know what to install because it just reads the package JSON and knows these are the two libraries I need. So that's pretty neat. Cool. Now that I have that set up, I'm going to go to my server.js, and this is a blank file. Now, in order to bring in a library from Express, you have to use what's called a require function. Require function, it kind of borrowed it from Ruby at the time. So if you've done Ruby, they have a require function as well. So basically, this always gets confusing when you're in JavaScript in life, because when you're new, it gets confusing on when you use this require syntax versus this import export syntax you may see when you're using like React and Vue and Angular. Technically, Node uses require. Okay, what happens when you use like React or Angular or Vue and you're able to use like import export? They're using a transpiler, particularly Babel and oftentimes Webpack, to transform that code. And technically, the code that ends up being run actually has like require statements. If you're talking about like Node code, or it just turns it in, bundles it into one file. But technically, that import export syntax is something called ES6 modules, which actually is a browser API, not a Node API. Although I think they're slowly have been introducing the ability to use import export natively in Node, and I think that is the norm in Deno, which is sort of the follow-up to Node created by the creators of Node. So how does that work? I create a variable, const express, so that's where I'm going to have my express stuff put in, and I just type in require express. So what this does, when I type in the name, it looks for a library called express. So it goes into this node modules folder, which you don't see right now because I deleted it. I reinstalled it, but VS Code has this thing where it doesn't necessarily always create new file watchers after I've just deleted it. So I could just get it to reappear by reopening Node. So let me do that. Or reopening VS Code. Okay, so there it is. So if you go into Node modules, those are all the libraries. Now I only installed Express and Nodamon, but there's a lot more libraries here. The reason is it also installs what those libraries use. So Express and Nodamon use a lot of these things that we see here. So there's Express. So when I say require Express, it goes to Express. It reads its package.json, and inside Express's package.json, it says, where's its main? Main. Not seeing it. Main. file. A lot of stuff going on here. Well, there's only one file in here, so I'm assuming it knows just to take it from the index.js. But see what it does, it takes this right here, and this is what it's exporting. So this module that exports, that's how you export something in Node. So it's taking whatever this is, which is coming from this folder over here, and that's what it's saving inside Express, which is actually just a giant object. How do I know it's a giant object? I can log it. So I can just type in console.log Express, and we'll take a look at everything that's in there. So let me just cd into intro to Express. Type in node server.js. And see, it's this big object with all these functions. Okay, so that's what the library is. So I'm bringing in the Express library inside this big giant Express object. The main thing I need to make is an application object, app, which you just do it by running this Express as a function. And this application object is really just sort of the logic for how a server request gets handled, okay? Because the way HTTP servers work in Node is that some browser somewhere sends a request to your server, and then your server runs that request and that response through through this function, and then sends a response, which is really complicated to do. So Express makes it really easy. It just creates this nice abstraction over that pattern. Okay, I'll give it a second for those sirens. Oh, Brooklyn. Okay, so just to recap, I've brought in the Express library, I've created my application object, and what I'm going to do is I want to start my server. So that server has to listen. So server, what it does, it listens for requests from other computers, from other browsers all over the world. Okay, so I have to listen, but every computer has like a lot of ports, a lot of HTTP ports. Kind of think of them as like ports in a ship port. So every ship is like, you know, hitting a different dock where it parks. Same idea. So if you want to communicate with my server, you have to point your traffic to the port my server is listening on. So I'm going to say app.listen, and I put in a port. Now usually the best way to do this is you create a variable, const port, and it's probably a good habit to make it uppercase just because it's convention. And usually this is what you'll do, process.env.port. You don't know what that is yet, don't worry about it yet. We will talk about environmental variables later on in the video. But generally the reason you want to put that there is because you'll probably deploy this to something like Heroku, and Heroku is going to give it its own port number based on its network. So this is kind of the way it injects it in there. But we don't have that going on right now, so we're going to put an or. So it means this variable, if it exists, if that variable does not exist, then just make it 3000. Okay, so then I'm going to go here and say, hey, listen for requests on that port, and then you put in a little function that runs right after the server starts listening. So we're going to just write a console.log. Okay. Listening, and I'm going to use backticks so that way I can use interpolation. So there's little fun quotation mark things. Listening on port, which it'll be whatever the port is there. Okay, so that's the minimum code you need to actually have a server running. So now I can type in, I'm going to use my dev script that runs Nodemon. So I'm going to type in Npm Run Dev. So when I type in Npm Run, the word after it's a script. So then it looks in the package.json for the script dev. So it's going to run that Nodemon server command. So I run that command and see, there's my port listening on port 3000. And there's that. So let's go to the browser. Let's go check it out. So that'd be localhost, because it's my computer, on port 3000. And it says cannot get, because I actually haven't created any kind of response. So right now, my server doesn't know what to do if a request comes in. So it just says I cannot get this for you. Okay? But the server is working. Okay? If the server wasn't running, it wouldn't look like this. It would look like this. See? So this would be, oh, the server's not running. If I can see the other screen, then the server's running. It just doesn't know how to handle the particular request I made. So in the coming videos, we'll talk about how to handle those requests. But this is the first video in our intro to Express. My name is Alex Merced from alexmercedcoder.com.